this computer, and it says recording in progress. So welcome to week number 5. Just a few announcements, those of you who didn't catch it. Today was supposed to be your biblical interpretation paper due. I extended it for another 2 weeks because I made a wrong announcement. I only announced that the Bible passage is due today, but it is not. It's supposed to be the biblical paper, interpretation paper. Now, it's really, the biblical interpretation paper is really your exegesis paper. But instead of you answering the questions, all the questions that we've asked on the actually the technically form number 1 that we didn't work on, this biblical exegesis paper is going to be outlined into 3. You're going to put an overview. You're going to put what does the scripture says and what does the scripture mean. Okay, so and you got 2 pages there, and it is double spaced. So please double space them. There's a reason for that because it helps insert my comments and it helps edit it when we need to edit it. Okay, so that's it. Also, we'll talk about more on form number 4. Okay, so where are we? Our class is about transformational teaching, right? We want to be effective teachers. And to be effective teachers, we've looked at a few items. We said we've looked at the teacher and how a teacher needs to be prepared. Then we looked at our content. That's the Bible, how we're going to study it and how we're going to present it. We're now on the part where we're presenting it, / we're also trying to understand the students, right? And who the students are. And so in these 2 places, between week number 4 all the way to the end, we're toggling between understanding the student and coming up with a better methodology in delivering God's message. Okay. I know that some of you probably, you probably saw our exegesis of the content fairly short. We just looked at it on 2 weeks and then we were done. And then we left on it and we jumped into understanding our students. And then today we'll be talking about presentation methodologies and presentation environments and things like that. Okay. If you have not done your reading this week, you are going to miss out because form number 4 is not tabled in this book, but it is discussed in this book. And that's actually with Newton's book, that is in page 140, hang on, I'm gonna open my eyes here. Page 143 all the way to 146. That's actually form number 4. Form number 4, which later on I will show you. Okay, so we're moving along. First, we were on preparing the teacher, and then we went to biblical exegesis, which is our form number 1. It was not graded. And then we started understanding who our students are. That's form number 2. And then form number 3 is looking at our content and asking what kind of goals do we have to put in there in order for us to know what our objectives when we teach our lesson. Objectives are very important. Goals are very important. You need to specify those. At the same time, in the past week, we've also talked about the 4 areas of how students learn, right? And if you remember, then they are the volitional domain. That's the cognitive domain. The cognitive domain speaks about their mental faculties, all right? The affective domain, it has the idea of the sentimental and the emotional part. And then we have the volitional domain, and that is when we're teaching the Word of God, we're asking in what way will they be challenged by this? Is there a command to obey? Is there an action to do? And so a lot of the descriptive words for for volitional is, is more verb form. We would say, I would like to see my students practice the 9 gifts of the gifts of the fruit of the Spirit there. So there's more of the action that's volitional. And finally, the last one, the behavioral. The behavioral is not just looking at what they would be challenged to do, but what they will do from this point on. All right. So, because remember, life transformation doesn't happen one Sunday only. It has to happen every day. It has to continue. So imagine that. Here you are, you're pouring in your life to teaching this coming Sunday, which some of you will be dwelling on some Bible verses, and you're preparing them, and you're excited, and the students gravitate on it. But isn't it a tragedy for students only to listen to it once and to be challenged on the day of study, and then never revisit that after the session? So we're saying that in between your session now and the next session, that's where the behavioral aspect that needs to be addressed. Okay. So having said that, then we've also looked at some of the characteristics of your students. We've looked at the physical characteristics of the children, and then the youth, and then the adults, the male, the female. It's interesting. We've really never camped on the difference between men and women. We probably don't need to, because we're very, let's just say, for lack of a better term, we're really very protective when it comes to cross-gender relationships. We're very protective in that. You notice that there's a men's Sunday school class, and then there's a women's Sunday school class. It's not regular that you find a co-ed class, even though there are, right? And it's not fairly regular to find a woman teaching over a man, or a man teaching many women or some women. Why? Because we're just very careful on not going there, right? That is a place for where teachers could miss their efforts, and before you know it, there's a problem in the class. Okay, so but there are differences between men and women, right?
Right.
Yeah, there are. It's only Mayumi that's a woman here represented. Oh, of course, Tess is here with us, and Bev, you're here. So go ahead, and if you have anything to say to us on how we can better understand women, that this would be a good time to do that, right? Men are fairly easy, right? They go inside the store and they're out by a minute because they know what they're going to buy. For what I learned, women are quite different. Yeah. How are they different? Well, they go inside the store. Yeah, and it takes them a while to get out of the store. Is that right, Bev? You're agreeing with me? Yeah, there you go. All right.
They don't have to go to the store. They go to the shopping
A
center.
little bit more longer. We overthink.
That's right. Okay.
They stay there till closing time.
So the store should have a women's playground so that, All right. So the whole idea is we want to meet the student at the point of where they're at, right? In other words, if they're naturally bent in learning certain ways, we want to present our lessons on those environments because it's easier. Remember, you only got an hour to discuss your topic. And like what I said, many pastors covet your situation. Pastors only get to preach. I remember Pastor Dennis and I were talking about what we're going to do on the anniversary of Milani Philam, and he goes, by the way, how long should I preach? And I looked at him and I go, well, it couldn't be an hour, right? And so most preaching that happens at Milani Baptist and Milani Philam would be around 30, 35 to 40. Max would be 45 minutes. But you, Sunday school teachers, small group leaders, I did a small group yesterday, and my son who drove the car going back home, drove us back home at around 12:30 in the evening. And my son goes, Dad, is this normal? We don't normally come home at 12:30, right? And I just go, no, we don't. But the discussion was lively. And we sat on Matthew chapter 13, starting in 23. It's the parable of the tares and the wheat. And everyone was just discussing, there was like a dozen adults there. And the 1 hour became 3 hours. And no one was in a hurry to go home. So, and there's food, so that's why they're not in a hurry, because there's food too at the same time. And guess what? Mike, who he's been attending the church for a while. He's the Howley Mike. He came to know Jesus yesterday. That's Lord and Savior. So the ladies in the small group kind of gang up on him, and he said, Pastor, normally I would feel the pressure, but this time I felt Jesus. So it's amazing. All right. So, but that's what, yeah, amen. That's what it is. We are limited in our approach. You got only 1 hour. You've got to deliver well, and you got to deliver best. So how are you going to do it? So you need to be mindful of your schedule. You need to be mindful of your time. It's just like putting a program for church, 5 minutes opening song, 2 minutes opening prayer, 3 minutes announcement, and then 4 minutes collection of offertory while the special music is being sang. You know what I'm saying? Right? You have to put a timeline on your presentation, because that's all you've got. That's all you've got. So when you're preparing for a class, you're actually thinking of that. You're thinking of that. And now that we've studied exegetically our Bible lesson, now we're gonna put a lesson plan out of it. And today we'll be talking about just the different modes of learning environment. And so on your classroom, there are some outlines there, and it's entitled lesson, and there are, I think, 2 basic lessons there. The first one is we're gonna talk about the methodologies. How do people learn? Okay, how do people learn? And it's all based on our reading. And so if you've read, this is going to emphasize what you've already read. But at the same time, we're going to add a few more things, because we're trying to contextualize what we're reading from this book. Okay, so I want you to come alongside with me. And immediately, we are in chapter 7 of Newton, chapter 7 of Newton. And we're talking about methodology. The problem when you're teaching, the problem with starting immediately asking a question, how am I going to deliver this? What am I going to do? When we ask questions like that on the top of our lesson preparation, we do a lot of injustice to our students, because you really don't know how to deliver until you have an idea of what you're going to deliver. So everything starts with study, right? Everything starts with study. Everything starts with the raw material. And when you have the raw materials, then kind of put that aside. And then you got to ask yourself, okay, who are my students? That's why we've looked at the physiological, the sociological, and we've looked at all of the intellectual and emotional. We've looked at those criteria because we want to know who our students are. Some of you are teaching young adults. Some of you are teaching young people. Some of you are teaching children. Many of you are teaching adults. And you vary because there's a co-ed class, there's male only and female only. And some of your class are varied from the age group, from the young adult to the older adults lumped up in one class. So now you're asking, who are my students? I'm done with my content. Now I'm asking, who are my students? Because out of this, you're going to say, now, how can they best learn and how can they best learn the lesson? Really, that's a key, right? And immediately, you know that if people don't participate on your lesson, most likely, they'll forget. You haven't even closed in prayer yet. They've already forgotten what you talked about. So the key is for them to participate. Okay? And when we say to actively participate, that comes in different formats. We're going to talk about that. What does it mean for them to actively participate? When I preach, from time to time, you'll hear me say that, right? And when I ask a question and no one's responding, we're going to just put a little smile on our faces and say, hey, anybody out there? Right? But we want people to participate. And that's the goal of methodology, is asking the question, how can I get them to participate in our lesson? Now, there are Bible teachers that doesn't like participation. They don't like to be disturbed when they're doing a lecture, which is what that is, a lecture, right? And the only problem with lectures is that it takes a gifted public speaker to speak more than 20 minutes and not lose anybody. That makes sense? And so if you're not a gifted public speaker, try avoid lecture. Lecture is a monologue. That's what we mean by lecture. You're the only one speaking. Everyone else is just staring back at you. Okay? But if you're a gifted public speaker, that's not a problem. But none of us are, and maybe you are, so excuse me. But many of us are not, right? So don't even think this way. I'm going to talk for the next 30 minutes. Discourage yourself to do that. Okay? Discourage yourself to do that, because you already know that if they don't participate, majority of what you're going to be talking about is just going to be on top of their head or be forgotten before you even close the prayer. So what's the key? In methodology, in finding out what's a better method, what will make them participate? What will make them participate? That's the thing that we're asking. What will make them participate? In fact, page 105, first paragraph, in the middle of the paragraph, we have a question to ask. We have a question to ask. Any one of you underline that? It says, I have found out that the more fundamental process involves asking the question. And what is the question? What will the class participants need to experience and wrestle with to accomplish the goals I have established from the biblical text? That's really the general question you need to ask. Now that you're done with your exegetical study, you're asking the question, okay, in order for my class to fully appreciate and learn from the goals that I've set, the question is, what do I need to do? What environment should I be making? What level of participation should I be opening it up for my students? Okay, very important. And remember, in page 106, our writer Newton kind of rehearses again the four domain aspects of a person's learning capability. The cognitive. We have the third paragraph of page 106, right? Cognitive, you got affective, you've got volitional, and you've got behavioral, right? Okay, are you all there in the third paragraph of page 106? Yes. Okay, let's just rehearse. What do we mean by cognitive, right? It says, in the cognitive domain, are you all there? Good. Randy, go ahead and unmute your microphone and read it for us.
So in the cognitive domain, this happens through thinking, wrestling, reflecting, questioning, hypothesizing, affirming, memorizing, speculating, imagining, and repeating.
So we know, right? So we know that the cognitive learning capability of a person has something to do with his mind. Memorizing, repeating, engaging. It's really the intellectual faculty of the person. So we're asking that. And then when we say affective domain, Gani,
Okay. Again, repeat. In the affective domain, learning happens through valuing, appreciating, enjoying, tasting, experiencing, evaluating, perceiving, observing, responding, feeling, and touching.
nice. That's what that is, right? The idea of hands touching. The story of Jesus who healed the lepers, right? And if that's your story this weekend, you're going to ask the question, what can I do for my students to fully understand the severity of that illness? Because a lot of these students of yours have not seen nor experienced, probably none of them have even read about leprosy. We've eradicated leprosy for a long, long time. But the Bible speaks of it because that's the condition of those people that Jesus learned to reach that no one else would reach. This is what Christianity is all about. We reach people who the world cannot reach, right? Question is, how are you gonna, what's the effective approach could you do when it comes to the senses, the feeling and the touching? And why do you want to go there? Because Jesus touched the lepers. Right? So in what sense? What kind of introduction, what kind of teaching model would you want to do here? Anybody? Yeah, please. Yes, I do. Go ahead and unmute your microphone.
In my own experience, just because I'm trying to reach out to all different types of people, and especially those who have a different background in beliefs, just like the Mormons or Iglesia Ni Cristo, or there's some atheists. When I pick up a topic or a text, I have to make sure that they will be able to understand it. At the same time, if they doesn't know the Bible, I will be able to teach them why we have to do certain stuff that we are doing as a Christian.
Okay, wait, you didn't answer my question.
Your question is,
If you're lesson is Jesus healing the leper,
yeah.
how would you use the effective domain, which is touching, tasting, feeling? How would you use that area to help your students understand this?
Oh, when I teach them, for example, how to become born again Christian, I explain to them that once you accepted Lord Jesus Christ to be your personal Savior, there's gonna be a change in your life.
Okay.
It's not physically.
Yeah, I understand. And I understand.
You gotta talk.
I understand you're trying to put, you're trying to parallel what I'm telling to something that you're experiencing. Don't go there. That's not my question. My question is,
About the hurt of the
if,
disease.
I'm sorry, Claude, what did you say?
You probably need to talk about the hurt of the disease and how people were so scared of leprosy because it was no cure for it. And the only one that at that time it was ever known to heal anybody with it was Jesus.
Sure.
And
So you probably You can open up the lesson with talking about some diseases that no one wants either to talk about, to touch, or to ever even get near, such as,
People.
oh, did you mention any?
There was an example in the book.
Uh-huh. Beb, you said there's an
the
example?
Snake bite.
Snake
Yes.
bite?
They referred to that Sunday school. They were using toilet papers to wrap around
The people.
their models
Uh-huh.
to present it as the lepers. And of course, majority of the kids wouldn't want to touch the toilet paper on their bodies. So,
Sure. Especially when you say it's a
represent
recycled toilet
physical,
paper.
effect.
Right. So you can talk about diseases. You can actually talk about what's going on now. What's going on now? Pandemic, COVID. If you find out someone has COVID, what do? Right?
Hug them.
You hug them. Thank you, brother guy. Well, that's true. That's true. But the whole idea is that in itself communicates the tension that Jesus was trying to do when he met with the lepers. Okay, so that is affective domain. June, volitional domain. What does it say?
In the volitional domain, learning happens by choosing, being, suffering consequences, trying things out, making mistakes, practicing, feeling remorse, and experiencing failure.
All right. Okay, so here is okay. So here's another aspect of how a student can learn. You can camp on the volitional domain and talk about engagements of failures, engagements of triumphs, or of people being committed to or not committed. And then finally, you got the behavioral. Okay, and Danny, go ahead and read to us the behavioral of that paragraph, please. Unmute your microphone.
In the behavioral or psychomotor domain, learning happens by trying, initiating, practicing, stretching, exceeding the limits, overcoming barriers, preserving, struggling, and repeating.
So you've got the persevering there is the word. So you've got all of these domains that you can use in the students' faculties, and you can reach them. Remember, they're like ladders that you can go in, and the more you fill your lesson with any of these entry points, the more transformative your lesson becomes. Okay, Matthew chapter 28, verse 20 did say what? Teaching them to obey all things that I have commanded you. So even Jesus understood that the behavioral aspect of your lesson should always be there, right? There's always a challenge. Don't just fill the minds don't just fill the minds of your students, but make sure that they are being engaged throughout the week. So if your lesson is about reading the Bible, what's your behavioral methodology? How are you going to reach the person to behave in a way that they're going to read the Bible throughout the week? What could you say?
Yeah, they show them the power of the Bible.
Show him the what?
The power that's in the Bible.
Show him the power.
Yeah, connected to his life.
Okay, all right. Show him how the Bible can transform you throughout the week. And all right, that's good. And in order for them to experience the power, what do they need? What do they need to do? They need to read.
Read it.
And in order for them to read, they need a book, Bible. So it really had become so practical. The application of your lesson had become so practical that you go, does anybody have Bibles here in their homes that you could use to read? Because that's the behavioral domain that we want to reach today if we want you to have a change of mind and read the Bible. Listen, you can talk all you want and challenge your students all you want. If they don't have a Bible, they won't read. That makes sense? Okay. So we know Henry Blackaby puts it this way: people come to know God through their experience with God. People come to know God through their experience with God. That's in page 107. Okay. So very, very important. Newton describes to us a diagram on how this domain work, because the whole idea of this of these presentations that you're doing every week is really to get the students to the point that they will act on it. Yes, that they would act on it. So in your book, the next chapter, the next page, also in your classroom, there is a diagram that we put for you, and that's in lesson 5, and it's illustration, the kite diagram right there. And as we open it, you see you see that there are two angles, two sides of the angle. You have the vertical and you got the horizontal. The verticals, Newton says, corresponds to the cognitive mind of the individual. And it has 3 levels. What are the 3 levels? Well, the level that the person has no conviction at all about the Bible. That's the first square. They call it the non-acceptance, and whatever the reason as to why that is, there are some reasons there. They're either ignorant, or they're either they just don't believe it, or they doubt it. Whatever the case, that's where everyone starts, right? That's where everyone starts. And that's the non-acceptance right there. The second level of cognitive response is what we call the conventional level. The conventional level, which people come to say, I believe, probably because they are influenced by a social cause or a political cause, or people believes it because it's a common sense. But that's the second square. Where we want the person to be is on the third square on the top, right? You see that on your lesson? The deep understanding based on truth. If we can get them there, that's what Newton is trying to say, that there are 3 levels of cognitive learning, and the top one is where we want them. Why? What's on the top one? It's a deep understanding based on what you're going to share. Okay, but notice, simply getting them on the top square doesn't move them until, which is the second portion of this diagram, until the emotional factor is considered. For example, the first square on the horizontal line is apathy. In other words, they could care less of what to believe. But the second is sentimentality. In other words, based on their heart, they believe on it because it's a natural thing to believe on. Could be because of life situation. It could be because of what the environment puts in them. But thirdly, really, this is where we want people to be emotionally. We want them to be so involved, right? In other words, that their emotional response is not dependent by what goes on outside of them, but it's something that goes on within them. Now notice, if the three squares farther out, the deep feelings, and then you've got the deep understanding, the third square on top. Anytime that strong emotion meets up, and that's the top right of the diagram, to the core belief meets out to the top right of the diagram, and when there's an intersection between strong cognitive response to a strong emotional response, we're saying if you can put them in that square, that's where they put the lesson into action. Okay? It's a very analytical, talk about critical mindset, critical thinking, right? The whole goal is to get the student into that top right square, because we believe that is the place of response. How many times have you heard an altar call said and it did not produce the result the pastor wanted? How many times? Plenty. Yes.
A lot of times.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do a lot of altar calls where I wish I would just sing songs. But you know what? The reason why the reason why God's people are not in that action is because their propositional mind is not connected to their emotional influence. Emotion and mind has not met. A lot of times we've only reached their mind. Oh, so I believe. Or sometimes we've only reached their emotion, and so they're very emotional, right? But if you want to move a person into action, you've got to move these two together. And that's where the top right square is at. It moves, and that's why he calls it a kite diagram, because it really is. It's not just in that one square. It's in that domain that looks like a kite. Somewhere there is really a place where the person will respond if the two elements are put together. That makes sense? I have a hard time explaining this, but to me it makes sense. Right? It makes sense. The only reason why Mike last night received Jesus, which, by the way, Mike has been coming to our small group over 6 months now, not regular. And but he gets to go to small group because once a month of Wednesday, the host, their house becomes the host. That's why he gets to hear. But yesterday's small group was not in his house. It's not in the place where he lives. It was somewhere else. And for 3 times in a row, Mike has been going to this house to listen and to discuss that the cognitive belief and the emotional passion is slowly meeting up, right? Because it's putting him into action. Imagine that. And then he shows up at church too. And when within that kite diagram, and when that belief and that emotion meets somewhere, the goal is for it to make point of contact. But if it's within that realm, and he is asked, would you like to make a commitment? If he's within that range, most likely he will say yes. And if for the past 6 months we've been asking him and he's not responding, it's only because he's not within that range yet. Does that make sense? And so what brings a person to that range? Right. And how you influence the mind and how you move the heart. Now, I know it's very secular thinking because only God can move the heart, right? And I agree with you. But really, but just for the sake of the study of behavioral science or studying people, the standard approach is if we can just move people to this certain field, a lot can change in a person's life. This is why people decides to lose weight. This is the reason why men and women go to the gym. This is why some of you decide to eat healthy food. Because right, Claude? The doctor said the mind, and then the body starts hurting, emotion. And when the two meets together, you go, man, I need that medication, doc. I mean, I need it now. Right? So that is what doing Bible lessons all about. It's getting the mind to get to a certain place and getting their heart to a certain place. And as you get better at understanding the physiological mindset of a person and the heart of the person, and also on how you cater your presentation. Really, that's catering, right? How you cater it. You get used to that. Man, your Sunday school will grow exponentially. There are reasons why Sunday school classes grow. There are reasons why Sunday school classes don't grow. Okay? Because a lot of times their bodies are just parked there. Their mind is someplace else, and their heart is occupied by something else. And here's a teacher trying to get the two together in a certain realm. That makes sense? Are we there? Does this make sense? I tell you, this kite diagram is very exciting. This is the place where we need to get our students to be in. And to me, because I approach this in a very spiritual way, to me, I ask the Lord, I don't fully understand this diagram, but it looks so pretty. Can you bring my students to the field? I mean, I don't know, Lord, if I'm doing my part, but can you just miraculously put them there so that when I show up, when we teach and we tell them they need to move, boom, the Spirit moves, right? This is what happened to Paul in his path to Damascus. This is what happened to Isaiah when he was in the temple praying when his friend King Uzziah died. This is exactly what Jesus was going through in the Garden of Gethsemane, when his emotion and his mind are struggling to be far apart, and it became together within that realm when he says, Lord, let this cup pass from me. The mind was pushing away. But when he said, but nonetheless, let your will be done, the heart and the mind went within the zone. And that's why he became obedient unto death. That realm is a realm of an endless possibility. Yeah. This is, by the way, this is another reason why your church grows. This is why people invite people to go to church. Because these men and women, their cognitive mind and their emotional side have met up. And that's why almost every Sunday they bring somebody with them. Because they've come to a point where they know for sure. That's what we call propositional, empirical, rational, experiential. They know for sure. Why? Because when they come, they get something all the time. So they don't want to be alone when they come. They want someone else to share the goodies with them. You know, when you go to a restaurant and the food is good, right? What's the normal thing that you would say after you're done? Well, yeah, you appreciate the food, everything.
Where's the dessert?
Good.
You what now?
The dessert.
You get the, did you say dessert? What's that? Wait. Okay, I got it. So now the dessert is over, and you go, man, this restaurant is jiving because the food is good, the dessert is good. And what's your normal response when you get out of the place?
Go come back.
You come back, and then you tell other people about the place, right? This is why businesses grow. Not because they have a dynamic promotional ads, but rather there's a word of mouth that when they move into that restaurant, their mind moves into the field, their emotions are moved in their stomach, and the taste buds are full. And when those quadrants come together close, comes a recipe to say, I should be coming back here, and I shouldn't be coming by myself, alone. And that's why people invite people to go to church. So if you've got 70 people, you've got 30 people, you've got 20 people coming to church and they're not inviting, try work on this recipe, belief and emotion. See how you could get them there. And you'd be so surprised that a lot of churches don't even make any effort to get the people there. It's just when you get into the church, they feel it already. So their mind is swayed and their heart is moved, right? Even without the preaching, even without the service hasn't even started yet. And by the ambience of the place, I remember last Sunday when we did the anniversary, 3 of the guests that I sat down with said this: I felt the presence of God. That's their heart and that's their mind and their heart meeting together. And that's how they become open to the work of God. All right. Hey, you know what? Work on that so much. Mr. Newton should give me royalty of his book by promoting his diagram. Okay. Our goal is to find the different dimensions of presentation, because there's no one track. There are many. So when we go to page 115, he talks about multi-dimensional learning, all right, or the different style, the different learning styles. And they're categorized into 4. And he quotes Eric Jensen here from the book Brain-Based Learning and Teaching. I'm in page 115. And that paragraph said, to stimulate heart-deep learning, teachers must engage learner in multi-dimensional approaches. Remember that 4 ladders, that's going to the heart? That's really what this is. And short to using the languages or the words that we have said, here is, he says, these 4 categories, right? He identifies this. He says, number 1, context variables. Number 2, input preferences. Number 3, processing formats. And number 4, response filters. These are learning style preferences. And when you're reading it, you go, woo! It's like, man, those are technical words. I don't even know what that means. Right, that's why we need to remember. You know what? It makes sense once we describe it to you. For example, context variables, right? And Jean, just feel free to open up your book on page 115 of Newton, all right? Context variables. The idea is page 115 in paragraph. It relates to how the students feel about their what? Immediate context. Underline that. All right. It relates to how the students feel about their immediate context. In other words, does the person learn well when there's a field trip or inside the classroom? Does a person learn well when it's unstructured or highly structured? Does a person learn well when they're left alone by themselves, Because there are people who learns well. That's why just give me the book and I'll learn it. Or are my learners interdependent, that they need to have people with them, student with them, or a teacher with them to learn Philippians 4, the message of 1 to 7. Not only that, but the last portion of context variables, or the variables, depending on the context, is that sometimes to move them, they need relationships. That's why you have small groups. That's why small groups work to some people. And there are people, small group doesn't work. So if they don't sign up for small group, don't even force them, right? Or maybe sign them up for a small group, but make it a big group, because they want anonymity. They can't learn, it hinders them when there's intimacy and small, but when it's large and big and there's anonymity, they feel relaxed and their mind is open. So what happens? They learn a lot. Okay? And that's what we mean by the context, right? Context is what's the student's reality. We have a student, we were talking to a student last night. That's probably why we ended up our small group at 12:30 in the evening. I'll tell you, it was in Iowa. You missed that. We have a student there. The mother said, Pastor, come. I'd like you to talk to my son. And every time I get an invitation from a parent to talk to their child, I already know it's either school, vices, or girls, or boys if it's girls. All right, and so here's a student who was telling me his story, and he was so concerned because I asked him, so is your condition in the school making you learn? And he said, no, I'm not learning. By the way, that is the most pathetic situation that could ever happen to a student, is to be in a learning mode and could not learn because of the environment, right? And I asked the question, why? Why can't you learn? Well, because last month, they moved me to special ed class. And I look at him and go, you don't look like disabled. Are you colorblind? Do you have, impediment on your speech or hearing? Or he said, no, I'm as normal as I could be. And so I said, why do you think they put you in a special ed class?
What grade?
5th grade. And I asked him, why do you think you're in a special ed class? He goes, I have no idea. And I asked the parent, you should have received something from the teacher and the principal that they moved him to. And the mom goes, no, nothing. I was just surprised to hear from my son that he was moved to another class. So here he is for 1 month sitting in a classroom for how many hours do they? 6 hours, 7 hours a day? They come in at 8 o'clock, they leave at 2 o'clock.
Because we also have lunchtime.
Okay, so there's a break.
Yeah,
There's a break. Let's just say majority of his educational time is within that environment that he repulsively just said to himself, I have nothing to do. And so for 1 month, he's just getting red flags from the teacher. Imagine that, right? And that's what the word context means. How can my student best learn what's their reality? So number one, context variable.
I heard that before.
Yeah.
And they can behave. They let them stay. They don't let them take break.
Understood.
Their punishment.
Yeah.
Not abuses. Yeah.
Understood. So back to your Sunday school class, you're asking, I have 5 students, what are their realities? How do they best learn? Do they best learn if we start walking around? Do they best learn if I ask them, how's house life? How's home life? Right? Do they best learn if I give them the Bible verse and have them talk to each other and then leave them alone for a few minutes and then we'll come back together? These are things that you have to ask, which works well for your students. And that's what we mean by context variables. So far, so good? Well, I tell you, that's a very technical word. Number 2, input preference. By the way, all of these are based on recent brain studies that some of these writers have alluded in our book. The input preferences. How do they best learn? In what methodology do they best learn? Let's, Claude, are you there? Could you read page 116, the first paragraph of input preferences?
116. There's something I don't see, but I'm here. The first paragraph,
Yeah,
where it says third category.
that's correct.
The third category under content variable relates to what
Oh, hang on. Move to the middle of the page, and it says the second category.
the second category. Oh, okay. The second category of learning preference identified by Jansen relates to the preference sensory form of input, whether it is olfactory, smell, gastroil, taste, eating, visual, audio, connect, bodily movement. While all people learn through sensory input, some naturally prefer one form over another. People tend to draw towards their preference. Under this category of learning preference, we will examine visual, audio, kinetics, form of input. Input relates to the type of sensory stimulation coming into your learning.
All right. So really, it has something to do with the affectual domain. The idea is the hands, the tasting. Some students learn well that way when they're involved auditorily, when they hear, when they see. That's why we give notes. Sometimes we give them a marker and a pencil and a blank paper, and we tell them, draw something on how you best understand the lesson of Genesis chapter 1, when God created everything. And that's really what this section is. There are people whose input preferences are different from one another. And so you have to find out among your students, all right, what are their input preferences. When you know, then you will know your methodology, specifically for a certain lesson. Then not only the way, not only their reality, meaning their life situation that you have to ask, how are they receptive? Number 2, how are they receptive in the delivery or the input? But number 3, how do they process the information? That's another way that you need to be asking, which brings us to page 117. All right, and Simon, thank you for making that comment. You hang in there, don't worry about it. Just listen in, all right? We are in page 117. We are in the processing formats. And this is called the third category, okay? And Mayumi, are you in that page? Very good. Go ahead and help us read it. Go ahead and unmute your microphone first.
Okay.
Very good.
The third category of learning preferences identified by Jensen is labeled processing format. This category of learning style analyzes how the learner manipulates data perceived by the senses. It relates primarily to the hemispheric dominance, while the left brain hemisphere focuses on speech, language, and calculations. The right brain hemisphere focuses on senses and pattern recognition. Under this category are 4 styles orientations relating to how learners tend to process input from their senses. Contextual, global, sequential, and detailed, linear, conceptual, and concrete.
Very good. Thank you, Mayumi. I know that's a handful right there. But listen, your students process information very differently. Okay. The fact that there's a left brain hemisphere and there's a right hemisphere of your brain tells you which are they dominant, left-handed, normally a left brain, and the right-handed are right side of the brain. That means if you can figure out what clicks for them on how they process information, you could easily bring the sphere of action a lot closer and get them to move and get them to act. For example, contextual global. The idea is there are students who sees the bigger picture before they could learn the details, right? They want to see the big picture. How many of you have done puzzles before? Done puzzles before, right? Have you ever done more than 1,000 puzzles? Crazy, huh? Well, how long did it take you? It's not even done yet? Right. There's a few children in the church where they are into details. They get in trouble because they're into details. I mean, they see something and they touch it and they wow, because they're into details. That's who their nature is. All right. And there are people who are not detail oriented. In other words, they could see a clutter in front of them and it would not move them. Why? Because they're not detail oriented people, right? They only see the big picture. As long as it's not on their way, it's fine. What's the whole idea? We process information very differently. Not only that, there are individuals who think sequentially. Point 1, point 2, point 3, right? And there are people who are detailed, linear. They have to begin from the beginning before you could bring them to the end. That's why they say, teacher, I got a question. What happened? How come Jesus did this? They're not asking that out of ignorance. They're simply asking that because that's how they think, right? And so when somebody says, why do we worship on Sundays? And we tell them because Jesus resurrected on the first day of the week, people who are detailed oriented or what we call linear thinkers are going to say, well, how did you get from how did you get from Jesus rising from the first day of the week to worship on the first day of the week? How did you get there? They want to connect that point. And they're never going to learn until you help them connect that linear point from point A to point B. There are people who think Sundays contextually and holistically. So you preach to them, Jesus rose from the first day of the Sunday, the first day of the week, and thus the church started meeting the first day of the week. 99% of the people will say amen. Why? Because they think very differently. The 1% will not say amen. They will say, I got a question. Not too fast, Pastor. Not too fast. Does that make sense? All right. So some are thinkers sequentially, some are detailed linearly. Other people think conceptually rather than concretely, while the others do think concretely, meaning they only see black and white. Yesterday, when we were talking about the parable of the wheat and the tares, right? And what was the story about the parable of the wheat and tares? Where the master sowed seeds, and in the middle of the night, when no one's looking around, the enemy came and also sowed seeds. And then the big idea of the parable of the wheat and tares is this: that the kingdom of heaven will be filled by genuine believers and fake believers, and the only way you're going to find out who the real and the fake ones are on the day of the harvest. That's the big idea. There are people who think so much in detail. They go, what time did the farmer wake up? And we're like, what? What are you asking? How did Jesus find food? Was he a farmer? And we're like, okay, wait. That's right. So, and there are people just all over the place, especially that's why when you teach parables, you immediately lay the rules for how to teach and how to interpret parables, because if not, 3 hours later, your lesson is not done. You're still trying to figure out how many leaves are there on the oak tree. You know what I'm saying? Or how many seeds are there in the pomegranate? How many seeds? Hundreds.
Depends how big it is.
Right. Exactly. So all that to say, students learn very differently from one another. Processing formats. How about response filters? Next page, page 118. Response filters. Okay, Pastor Jonathan, are you able to read to us the fourth category? By page 118.
The fourth category. Of
Try again.
learning.
Perfect.
Okay. Response filters. The fourth category of learning preferences is based on how people naturally respond after they have process the information from their environment. Their intuitive response is usually based on factors such as time, assessment of risk, referencing points, or personality traits. The categories under response filters include three pairs of style, representing ways learners to tend to respond after they have processed the information. The first is external reference.
Versus.
External reference. The second is matcher versus mismatcher. And the third is impulsive experimental versus analytical experimental.
All right. All that to say, thank you, Pastor. All that to say that people process information differently from one another. Okay. And so you have to ask, how do my students process information when I give to them? Why? Because there are those who process information by comparing what they hear from what they've learned in life. That's why from time to time, when you teach them the Bible, somebody would say, oh, I remember when my mother was telling me when I was young, right? Because that's how they learn, by looking at their external reference. And some would say internal reference. They would say, oh, I remember when I experienced this, right? And that's how you learn. Last Sunday, we had Auntie Sean give testimony. And what drove her to the testimony was her internal reference. Something happened to her. And that something happened to her connected her to the church. You see. So and so that's why sometimes we interview people as to tell me your story. Because sometimes their stories are the ones that moves them forward in their learnings of Christ. Okay, so that's response filters. There's many of them. I want to move forward and I'll talk about very quickly. Let's see here. Let's go back to our class. Okay. And I want to expose you to form number 4. Okay, and I'm just going to open that. And when you open this, you cannot edit this. Okay, you cannot edit this. There's a reason why that is so. And I'll tell you, however, how you can edit this. You might say, Pastor, I want a copy of this so I can take notes. So what do you do? Well, here's what you do. When you open it, right now I am in a teacher's view. Let me log in as a student. Hang on, so I can show you. See, I'm teaching you in a hands-on, right? This is a hands-on approach. Hang on. Let me sign in as a student and get to the classroom, get to the classwork. Okay, and go to week number 5, and I am in form number 4, learning experiences, not exercise 4, but form number 4. I'm gonna open it, and I'm gonna open that doc. When I open that doc, as I see it, okay, the question, of course, some of you are saying is, can I take notes with this? And the answer is no, you cannot. Right. So what do you do? Right. You need to make a copy for your own. So how do you do it? Click File, and you click the word Make a Copy. And when you do that, you put it under your name. Rename. Rename the file according to your, and then it's gonna save in your drive, and then click OK. And so now the file in front of you is now editable, because this is a file that goes into your drive. And watch, I am able to edit it now. You don't need permission from me. You can actually just do this on your own. Okay. All right. And are there any questions from the class? Let me stop here for a while. Are there any questions on what I just did? Okay. So you need to have your computer, and you need to have an access to the classroom. And once you open a file, go to the word file and make a copy. Whatever copy you make is yours, and you can edit it. In fact, right now is a good time to start making your own copy, because we're going to go through the form. And by the way, the form looks so familiar because they are the same as form number 3. Okay. It just so happened that it is extended form. Okay. All right. So we're going to sample the lesson today by looking at Philippians chapter 4, verses 4 to 7. Philippians chapter 4, verses 4 to 7. Before I even get there, maybe it's healthy for us to go to chapter 8 very quickly. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm still in Newton's book. And what is my time? 7:44. Give me another 15 minutes and we'll take a break, okay? In chapter 8 of your Newton book, Newton specifies 12 ways on how you can present your lesson. Okay, page 122. Okay, Kenny, go ahead and read to us the 2 big headers there if you have your book. Unmute your microphone first.
Page 122.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And chapter 8, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so it says, I have found that novelty and spontaneity can spark deep levels of learning in the most surprising situations.
Okay, Kenny, what I want you to do is I want you to find the first 2 big headers.
Okay.
Go ahead and read it to me.
I'm sorry, I'm using the Kindle.
I understand. Okay. Just keep on scrolling to the next page until you find the first header.
and role play.
So this would be the drama.
Drama, yes. And what's the
Okay.
second one?
Drama. Second one will be role play.
Role play. All right, let's stop there for a while. So in other words, remember there are contextual variances, and there are different input processes, and there are different realities, and there are different ways of the brain response, that your students respond. So now we're looking at 12 ways of how to creatively teach your lesson. You can teach a lesson through drama, okay, which is reenactment. And by the way, children love this. Teenagers, they kind of squirm away from this, but it does make sense to them, especially if it's relatable to them. Adults, of course, even more. Role play. Role play. And role play doesn't have to act on it, but they can just assume a role. If we're talking about Martha and Mary and Jesus and Lazarus, I can just pick out 4 people right now while they're sitting down. And while we're reading the Bible, I will say, you will read what Martha says, you will read what Mary says, you will read what Lazarus says, and you will read what Jesus says. So your scripture reading becomes a role play. That makes sense? All right, next categories. Next categories. Bev, read to me the next 2 categories. Unmute your microphone.
The next 2 categories is this mime
Mime
and simulation.
and simulation. All right. 2 unique words, and most of the time, young people love doing this. Mime is really when there's no talk, it's all just action. All right. And the present generation, especially those, I remember doing a youth ministry in California, they're into hip hop and into that kind of music. And I was doing a Noah's Ark lesson. How obedient was Noah, and how out the big idea, how out of his obedience his family got saved. That's the big idea. And the story was about Noah, and he built the ark. So how are you going to deliver that lesson? So I asked 7 students. I gave them 5 minutes to prepare. I said, I want you to tell me at the top of your head the story of Moses in a hip hop environment. Gave me 5 minutes while I was talking to the rest of the youth and giving the fine points. And then I said, and now here is Noah's Ark hip hop edition. And you've got one kid started to go boom, a boom, boom. And you got Noah go a boom, boom, a boom, boom. And you've got the animals going like this. Yeah, yo. You know, that's drama, you might say, but that's mime. Mime is a reinterpretation of the story in the lens of the students or the learner. Simulation is the same way as role playing, but it has the idea of identifying to the characters. It's more than just a role play. It is identifying themselves to the character. The next 2, and I should call, let me see, Tess, the next 2, do you have the book with you too, Tess?
Nope, I don't have, sorry.
Oh, that's all right. Okay. And my apologies, I did not scan. I thought everybody has books. And so I'm going to go back to scanning and make sure you all have copies of this. Okay. So let me see. Pastor Jonathan, give me the next 2. The next 2.
Story, discussion.
Okay, go ahead and unmute your microphone first. There you go. Storying, and next one? Discussion. Right, storying and discussion. And storying literally is storytelling. But there's more to storytelling by just telling the story. The Saludes' family are really good at this, from Pastor David to Pastor Jerry to Pastor Jerry. Is there another Saludes? There's only two? Yeah, two of them.
Nephew.
The nephews.
Baby.
Okay, there you go. Yeah.
Florida.
It's in Florida. Okay. Great family. I tell you, they are good storytellers. If you've not catch Pastor Jerry, go to Seafarers Ministry and you'll see him do this all the time. He has a Saturday morning Bible study, has a Facebook Live. He does it, and outstanding when he does storytelling, because it's more than just teaching the story. He's actually retelling the story in a very unique way. Pastor John, Charlene Vaughn, Pastor John Vaughn. We call him Kahu John from Kalihi, the former pastor of Kalihi Baptist Church. He is another masterful. I call him the local storyteller because he's the kind pastor, right? He tells stories in a very unique way. Anyway, so that's story. And then discussion is, you open it up to the floor and you talk about the story. And that's another way of learning. Now, you got to realize and understand, when you're adopting some of these methods, you cannot have majority of your teaching time dedicated to it. You just got to give a portion to it, enough to open up that gateway of cognitive mind and affectual mind and behavioral mind, anything that could get them involved, and depending on where where the student's reality. That's really what we're trying to say here. So don't design your whole 15 minutes just for this. That you're not a producer or director, so you're gonna lose a lot of the students. So just enough, maybe 7 minutes, enough to spur. In fact, you can make it a case study, page 127, right? And many others. Actually, there is creative writing and speaking. Okay. The last two, Danny, on page 130 and 131. Why don't you read that for us? The last two forms.
Art, music.
Last two, that's 12, and there it is. Questioning and small groups. Or did I skip two?
Yeah, you
skipped them.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Art and music and web-based research.
There you go. Art, music, web-based learning. So here are other ways of how to get your students involved. So you've got 12 all in all, 12 learning experiences that you can carve out from your teaching time that gets them actively involved. Does this make sense so far? Really, that's the goal. It's getting your students involved either right from the beginning or somewhere in the middle. Now, starting in page 132, he brings, another form of learning. It could be questioning. It could be small groups. It could be personal, moral, or ethical dilemmas. Okay. And it could be, which is the last 141, reflection, feedback, question, accountability. We call this the responsibility building strategies. Okay, so which do you get to use this coming Sunday? What's your lesson this Sunday? It's already Thursday. I assume that you've already read the Bible for your weekend ministry. And everyone's quiet. No one's looking at me. Come on now. Monday is when we read our lesson, right? Monday and Tuesday, because by Tuesday, Wednesday, you should be doing your exegesis. That's form number 1. When you get to Wednesday, you are already in form number 3. Form number 2 is about just student assessment, which you already do all the time. And by Wednesday, Thursday, you would have already figured out a way to interact and relate your story to your students, which is your form number 4. And we're going to do that right now. Okay, so we are going to take a break. We're going to take a break. Let me just pause